Hello there and welcome to the Double Zero Challenge channel. We do just one thing on this channel, and that is to take these two dice and see how long it takes before we can roll a double zero. If you would like to play along, you can write down your guess now, but please don't post that guess in the comments. Let other people watch the video and find out for themselves. There will be more to explain as we go along, but let's get cracking. So rule number one is a 5 and a 7, sorry. Here we go, misreading on the very first roll. Remember, we're looking for a double zero. And that is a 4 and a 7. And that is a 5 and a 3. A 6 and a 7. Oops. And that is a 3 and a 2. A 2 and an 8. And that is an 8 and a 3. A 3 and a 5. And we have a 6 and a 3. And that is a 0, but it's also a 6. So we're only looking for a double zero. If we do get any other doubles, we will note them down, but that's just to see how we're getting on, because the statistics of 1 in 100 very rarely match what happens under real world conditions. Anyway, let's move on. And that is a 4 and an 8. And an 8 and a 7. And we have a 4 and a 1. And that is a double 8, like I said there. We will note that down just to see how many we encounter on the way to double zero. And that's a 0, but it's a 7. And that's a 3 and a 6. And we have a 9 and a 1. And that's an 8 and a 1. And that's a 0, but a 7. And that's a 9 and a 6. A double 3, so we sling that on the pile. And that's a 3 and a 5. We have a 0, but an 8. And that's a double 1. And that's a 3 and a 6. And a 5 and a 2. And that's a 2 and a 4. And an 8 and a 9. And that's an 8 and a 1. We have a 0, but a 1. Just one digit away from what we're looking for. And that's a double 1. Again, goes on the pile there. And that's a 4 and a 2. We have a 7 and a 9. And that's a 5 and an 8. A 6 and a 3. And a 0, but a 4. Oops. Oh, slipping away from me there. That's an 8 and a 2. There are minimal edits in this, so if any mistakes like that happen, you will likely see them. We carry on, it's a 0 but a 9, and it's a 0 but a 6, a 2 and a 6, and that's a 5 and a 6. That's a 2 and a 7, and we have a 7 and a 5, and that is a 0 but a 6, and we have a 6 and a 5. As we approach 50, I just need to tell you that when we get to 50 and every multiple thereof, we're going to do a massive roll with 2 hands. But let's see how we get on in the 5 rolls leading up to it. And that's a 7 and a 2. And that's an 8 and a 1. A 0 and a 6. A 0 but a 2. And the double hander. Nice big 3 and a 1. So we carry on for 100 rolls. And that is a double 6 to start the next line. And it's a 0 but an 8. And that's an 8 and a 1. A 7 and a 4. And that's a 6 and a 2. 3 and a 1. A 5 and a 2. And we have a 6 and a, yeah, it's a 6 and a 6. Something that on the pile. Sometimes hard to tell with 6s and 9s. I know they've got a little line, but in the heat of the moment, it's sometimes hard to mentally rotate them. Anyway, it's not a double 0, so they don't count. And we move on to a 6 and a 1. And that's an 8 and a 4. And we have a 7 and a 5. A 9 and a 5. And that's a 0 but a 6. And that's a 0 but a 4. That's a 3 and a 1. And we have a 9 and a 4. A 7 and a 6. That's a 2 and a 3. That's a 3 and a 5. A 7 and an 8. An 8 and a 3. And that's a 3 and an 8. 7 and 4. 8 and 4. And we have a 1 and a 4. 7 and a 1. And that's a 3 and a 4. We have a 6 and a 7. And that's a 5 and an 8. and an 8 and a 5. And that's an 8 and a 5 again. And a 4 and a 2. And that is a 6 and a 2. A 7 and a 6. It's a 0, but it's a 1. So we're just 1 off there. And that's a double 7. Let's sling that on the pile. That is our 7th 7 on the way to 100 rolls. Remember, that's a hypothetical odds under real world conditions. Doesn't quite work the same. So let's keep going. And that's a 2 and a 3. A 5 and an 8. And that is a 2 and a 6. A 0 and a 4. 0 but a 4, should I say. A 3 and 7. It's a 0 but a 1. A 7 and a 6. And we have a 0 but an 8. And that's a 1 and a 3. We've got a double hander coming up shortly. A 0 but a 5. A 7 and a 5. And that's a 7 and a 1. That is a 6 and a 1. And the big one for 100. It's a 3 and a 1. So we carry on for 150 rolls. That is a 0 but a 1. A 9 and a 5. That's a 5 and a 3. An 8 and a 5. And that is a double 5. That's 8 doubles so far. And we have a double 4. That brings us up to 9. And a 1 and a 3. And that is a 9 and a 1. And we have a 0 but a 3. That's a 3 and an 8. And that's a double 8, bringing us up 10 doubles, but still no sign of a double 0. And that's a 4 and a 2. And we have a 3 and a 9. And that's a 3 and an 8. And a double 5. A 6 and a 1. And we have a 4 and a 7. That is a 1 and a 7. And a double 2. So slight run of doubles there, but not the double we're looking for. It's a 0, but it's a 2. 3 and a 1. A 0 but a 3. and that's a 3 and a 7. And a double 4 there. That is a 6 and a 9. And we have a 6 and a 7. An 8 and a 2. And that's a 0 but a 1. A 5 and a 2. And that's a 4 and a 1. 2 and a 1. And that's a 2 and a 7. We have an 8 and a 9. And that's a 0 but a 7. A 1 and a 5. And that's a 0 but an 8. A 3 and an 8. And that's a 0 but a 4. And we have a 6 and a 9. And an 8 and a 3. A 5 and a 2. And that's a 7 and a 3. A 0 but a 6. And we have a double 9 there, becoming our 14th double. A 9 and a 4. Very shortly, it will be the 150th roll with the two hands. But first, 4 and a 5. And that's a 7 and a 9. That's a 9 and a 2. A 3 and a 5. And the big one. It's a 5 and a 4, so we carry on for 200 rolls. That's a 4 and a 2. And we have a 3 and a 4. A 4 and a 7. We have a double 9. And that's a 3 and a 6. A 3 and a 7. And we have a 3 and a 1. And a double 7. And that is a 6 and a 1. That's a 2 and a 7. And we have a 9 and a 6. There we go. That's a 5 and a 6. And a 2 and a 3. It's a 0, but it's a 6. A 3 and a 4. And a 3 and a 7. We have a 7 and a 4. And that's a double 1. Stick that on the pile. 2 and a 3. And that's a 9 and a 4. We have a 4 and a 6. And that is an 8 and a 9. 7 and 1. A 4 and a 7. And we have the number, a 00. Who'd have thought it? 150, 160, 170, 175 rolls. And on the way, we encountered 17 doubles. So, not quite the 1 in 100 odds, but like I said earlier, that is hypothetical, doesn't necessarily work under real world conditions. Thank you so much for watching. You take care and roll on next time.